Cancer cells will apparently grow forever under the right circumstances, but we all know that nothing good happens if they grow for too long. Of course, humanity copies nature, but why is there such an obsession with infinitely growing economies on a planet with finite resources? Could we grow too large for our own good?
Hi, my name is Christian, and I'd recommend you get some snacks because today we are covering that paradox and explaining some solutions that could help make a more sustainable and equitable civilization. So let's jump in. We live in a world of abundance. Although far from equal, it's fair to say the majority of people on Earth live more comfortably now than at any other time in history. As humanity transitioned away from burning logs to fossil fuels for energy, it significantly increased our ability to travel, grow plants, extract resources, terraform the land, and create something called a consumer-based economy. The transition to a more efficient energy source was the game changer, and it's credited with an increase in almost everything that you can measure. Now, this video is intended to provide some practical solutions for all the things that scientists are warning us about. But I've got to lay out the context of the last 100 years so we can understand why the solutions at the end are so important. It was around 1900 when our species finally had the means to take over the world. Our global population exploded from 1.6 billion to nearly 8 billion people today. Some top-line crucial things that have changed this last century includes the deforestation of half of Earth's forests, damaged the majority of topsoil, polluted the majority of our water with plastic, and we have officially entered the 6th mass extinction. As bad as that sounds, the most troubling part of this situation is that the fuel sources that helped build this global economy are going to run out in around 100 years. And as we get closer to that point in time, those fossil fuel energy sources will only get more expensive as they get more scarce, or at least at the rate humanity is consuming. This is really critical because every product we consume requires the input of fossil fuel energy, and many of the grids throughout the world can't reliably provide renewable energy yet. Short-term benefits are being prioritized throughout the world. And many countries are led by people that love bragging about GDP growth, trade deals, and economic expansion. Admittedly, it's logical, because a vibrant economy historically leads to a rise in the standard of living, and a growth in the population size leads to more consumption naturally. But now that we have the power to drain the planet, we must ask ourselves, how much should our economies incentivize consumption? The idealist in me thinks this should be when all the people in a country have all the basic necessities of life, plus some access to some of the fun things that makes life worth living for. But this is the wrong way to look at it. Personal opinion has little to do with it at this point, since there is a more objective way to know when our global economy has grown too large, and it's by taking stock of the known resources and determining if humanity is consuming the resource faster than our planet can replenish its inventory. Many resources are overused right now, but the most critical to a global economy are the metals and fossil fuels that are deposited within Earth, and many of those resources took hundreds of millions of years to build up to what we have now. So Pikachu is my go-to in Smash, but just as the global economy experienced a boost of energy and speed after the Industrial Revolution, humanity itself is nearing the end of its OP advantage over nature. What I mean by this is that as we begin to run out of resources, we will gradually lose access to all the products which benefit our lives. And if that happens, many of us might die, and the rest of us would have to get used to a much lower standard of living. Brutal, yes, but unless you're just hoping for a spontaneous invention to dig us out of this hole, we need to begin thinking about the future we're leaving on this planet. I still think humanity has a chance to work through this, but let's just hope if the lights go out, all our knowledge isn't stuck on a server. To recap, our primary energy source is running out, and the supply of metals is shrinking every day. But this doesn't mean that we're screwed. It just means that we need to reevaluate our economic priorities and figure out a way that we can consume more equitably. A recent report by the UN indicates that the top 10% income earners on Earth are creating more emissions than 50% of humanity. Emissions can broadly provide insight into how much consumption is occurring, and at this point, it's clear that a small amount of people are responsible for the bulk of our consumption problems. This isn't to say that average income earners in wealthy countries are off the hook though, because we are also consuming at unequal rates compared to the lowest income earners on Earth. Even if we manage to make a world where everyone's consuming more equally, it doesn't simultaneously solve the problem of overconsumption. Consider that many developing countries are currently climbing out of poverty and are on their way to becoming classified as a quote-unquote developed country, which generally means having a robust financial system and high levels of consumption. With this in mind, it is a little weird and pretentious to say that you live in a developed country. Kinda gives off the vibe that everything's done and progress has peaked. But I digress. Going forward, I find it hard to believe that countries struggling with poverty will listen to wealthy countries when they request them to slow down the growth. Poor countries want their turn too, even if it means they have to use dirty fuel sources. So overconsumption is not only a material issue, but also a global cultural norm that has seeded desires to consume, because consumption is associated with prosperity. We have to remember that a major premise to growing an economy is that consumption is necessary. But all consumption is not equal in the way it drains resources from the earth, and some inefficiencies can be worked out with future-oriented public policy. History indicates that every economic system fails eventually, and it's impossible to predict when a system will end or transition. But supposing we continue with a global capitalistic model, here are 3 of the most practical solutions that data says would make a huge difference. It's common for the wealthiest people to claim they pay their fair share, but that's up for debate. Not because of some liberal agenda that needs more funding, but because our global tax systems rarely account for the environmental impact of our lifestyles. Best showcased by the fact that approximately 70 million people on Earth create 15% of total emissions, meaning the top 1% may be paying some taxes in their country, but they aren't paying for the shortages or damage this kind of consumption will lead to across the world, even if they agreed to foot the bill. There are countless ways that construction projects, luxury items, or the purchase of private planes can be written off as a business expense. To fix this, the introduction of a carbon tax would help to capture the necessary funding to adapt to climate change and incentivize renewable energy.
For context, there are many different ways to implement a carbon tax, but in general, the government sets a price that emitters must pay for each ton of greenhouse gas emissions they emit. The moral and practical reasoning for this type of tax really goes back to the fact that only 10% of humanity is responsible for 50% of emissions.
So far, carbon taxes have failed in many countries because they often target the working class by making gasoline and other necessary products more expensive. So it's time that wealthy countries look at this data objectively and create policies that discourage overconsumption and reward efforts to reduce consumption. 2 great examples might be providing a tax credit for living in a smaller home, buying an electric bike, or using a train for long distance travel instead of a plane. You ever heard the phrase, "they don't build it like they used to"? Well, that's never been more true than it is today, because many companies throughout the world have shifted to a model of planned obsolescence. This is the strategy of engineering an expiration date into a product, instead of trying to create a quality product that lasts for a long time. Some big-time offenders of planned obsolescence are companies like Apple, Microsoft, car companies, and every printer you've ever used, all designing products that either break early, can't accommodate future software updates, or sometimes change the size of charging ports, making all your old chargers useless over time. They know what they're doing, and they do this because they want people to purchase the next model sooner and ideally on an annual basis. Designing products for short-term use is very profitable because it means you'll always have a new shiny thing to sell next time, even if it only has a minor improvement for a single component. You know, this phone's fine, but the next version can see my pores even better. Currently, there is no global standard for limiting the amount of resources a company can purchase to create short-term, marginally improved products. But establishing limits on the total amount of resources a company can consume each year would help incentivize the creation of products that are easier to recycle and help inspire innovations that create more with less. Now for the strategy that literally anyone can be a part of. As it stands, humanity is using the majority of our water, land, and food to feed livestock animals, all while millions of people struggle with scarcity for those very resources. So next time you grab a quarter pounder at McDonald's, remember that took over 600 gallons of water,
and your favorite breakfast sandwich could have a carbon dioxide equivalent to driving a car for 12 miles.
which is pretty crazy considering most people in America don't even live that far from one, meaning your food choices are sometimes polluting more than your ride to the drive-thru. On top of that, countless studies have verified that the calorie conversion rate for animal products is dismal compared to plant-based alternatives. And the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the largest organization of US diet specialists, has stated that a plant-based diet can be appropriate for all stages of life, including pregnancy. Despite the fact that hundreds of billions of dollars of global government subsidies support those industries, animal agriculture is actually responsible for nearly 15% of emissions. And researchers have claimed that reduction is one of the fastest and cheapest ways we can reduce emissions and improve food security. Since taste and convenience are the priority for most people, banning these products is completely out of the question. But I do think that everyone should be paying the actual cost of these products up front, not with taxes. Right now, people can buy burgers for under $2 because their own taxes helped make it cheaper. But I propose gradually shifting subsidies away from animal agriculture and more toward plant-based alternatives that are less impactful on the environment. Those same subsidies could also be given to farmers to help repurpose their land. That way farmers can take pride in their land, and taxpayers can rest assured their taxes aren't actively harming the earth. So those are some ideas I think would help, and although there is always the chance that a new technology or material will be invented that solves our problems, it's not worth the gamble. I just want us to be prepared because humanity's current consumption habits are draining our home. And if we don't slow down now, we may reach a point of no return, which could mean scarcity, destabilized governments, and the next generation will have a much more insulting term to call us than boomer. We can't let this happen. And we need to remember that consuming less is far better than consuming the right way. So take it or leave it. Don't trust a guy on the internet. Look into this yourself and figure out what's going on with the earth and humanity's consumption. But if you like the way I break stuff down, you can watch either of these videos. And with that, please like, subscribe, let me know what you think, and I will see you in the next one.